นะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังกุณุตรังอุปัชฌายังนามาสามิ When I first arrived in Wat Pah Pong and Ajahn Chah's monastery in 1978, my experience and experience of many of the monks of that generation, previous generations, was that you were pretty much left to your own devices, and I'm using that term in the original meaning, pre-telephone and modern devices. So, meaning, you were pretty well left by yourself and to yourself, and hardly anybody would tell you, do this, do that, be here, be there. And it was only sometime later I realized this wasn't any kind of neglect or lack of organization so much as a deliberate policy on the part of Luang Por Chah and his own way of sorting out who was really committed and who really had what it took to make it in the monastery. So you were expected to be observant, and I straight away noticed one monk who I thought was very noble in his bearing and very mindful, or at least what I perceived to be the trappings of mindfulness, and I started to follow him around and carried his bowl and arms round, and then got to know him a little bit, and he spoke a little bit of English, so I started to pick up a few things. Fortunately, there were a few other Western monks who I could ask for advice also. But also, I think in retrospect, I learned as much from the kind of, if I may say, the sloppy monks as the really kind of respect-inspiring deportment monks, and learning, observing what not to do is often as useful as observing what to do. Ajahn Jandi, who some of you may know, who has been to visit here before, and he recounts how many of his own generation left. People who arrived at the same time as him just felt completely lost and homesick and couldn't make anything out of it at all, and went home. And I remember that Ajahn Chah, in fact, said to some of the Western monks, you're very fortunate that you can't run home as easily as the Thai monks, otherwise probably very few of you would still be here. But this emphasis on self-sufficiency and observation is something that runs very deep in our practice, there's often a debate or some conversation in Thailand is a relationship between Buddhism and science, and of course there are certain areas in which you can see some overlap, particularly on the importance of observation. Perhaps might say that science is, so generalizing here, science is pretty well based on things you can measure, and of course many of the internal phenomena that we are observing in our Dhamma practice is not measurable. You can also say that maybe science takes the scientist for granted, whereas in Buddhism we consider the scientist as also one part of that which is to be observed. But this common emphasis on observation, I think, is probably one of the chief main areas in which there is some real linkage. And the interest, commitment to observation of body and mind leads us to observe that there are certain conditions which are conducive to this kind of learning, and certain conditions which are obstructive to it. So, to give an example, the Buddhist attitude to morality. We look at the 5 precepts, for instance, and can see some common ground with the commandments and the ethical teachings and teachings on ethics and other religions and philosophies. But in Buddha Dhamma, we don't start off with a faith in a divine power who can reward us when we behave well and punish us when we behave badly. But we start with a question, is that as unenlightened human beings with many defilements which we can observe, how can we live together in such a way that we can all flourish, we can all grow in the Dhamma? So what are the conditions which are conducive to growth in Dhamma? And the most fundamental condition, I would argue, is that of safety, feeling safe. So I'm much taken by one of the Buddha's pronouncements when he said that keeping precepts is the great dana, mahadana, the great gift that you give to the world. Because if we can accept this point that before all else we need to feel safe, then giving the gift of safety is giving the great gift. And by taking the precepts, keeping the precepts, we give this gift of safety to all those around us. We say, in effect, that although I still get angry sometimes, lose my temper, can feel resentment, spite, all these negative emotions can still arise in my heart, even, or perhaps especially, towards those that I love the most. And I can't forbid those feelings from arising. But I do promise that I will not act upon them. So what the Buddha is suggesting is that we make use of this wonderful gift or this wonderful quality that we have as human beings, something that we can observe. This is not a matter of faith, is it? That we can see in ourselves that we don't always follow our instincts. Our immediate instinct may be to lash out at someone through fear or through anger, but we don't always do that. We might see something just laid on the floor here, and it's something that our instinct is, I want that. But we don't always take it. Maybe sometimes you might, but usually you don't. Why? Because as human beings, we can say, no, that wouldn't be right. Or that belongs to somebody, and they would be upset if it was to disappear, if I was to take it. So this is something we can observe, isn't it? We have these instincts, and we're not saying that they are bad or wrong, but we are observing that we don't necessarily have to follow them. In the case that we feel some sense of compassion or a sense of a perception of right and wrong, then we can just not do. And this is this quality that we have, this ability that we have not to blindly follow our instincts, is the basis of morality in the Buddhist teachings. So we say, yes, I admit, sometimes I feel really angry, maybe even I want to hit you or abuse you. These feelings do arise, and but I won't act upon them. I will not, under any circumstances, abuse you physically or verbally, no matter how I feel. So if somebody says that to you, how do you feel? You feel safe. And each of those precepts is a gift to the people around us. This is how we feel safe and how we trust each other. We don't trust each other because we have idealistic views about love and companionship and friendship and sacrifice and all those uplifting ideas, but we recognize that the human mind is a sphere, is a realm in which every kind of thought and every kind of feeling can arise. It's like if we have a door in this is a building dedicated to study and practice of Buddhist teachings. But if we have the door open, anybody could walk in. A mass murderer could walk in, a terrorist could walk in, anybody. Why? Because the door's open. And there is nothing within this building which would, or an open door in this building which would in itself screen the kind of people who can walk through it. If they're physically able to walk through the door, then they can. And it's similar with the human mind. You can have any kind of thought. That's just the way the mind is. In I'm speaking to someone who hasn't lived in the West since I was a teenager, but my impression is that in the West we tend to prioritize negative thoughts and emotions over positive. That's to say that you could have a very kind and generous impulse to help others and put a lot of effort into some act of generosity and kindness, and then within within the time allotted to that action, there is a thought just pops up into the mind, a thought of the praise that we might receive because of this action, or some rather kind of mean and petty thought, and yet the tendency is to grasp onto that and to say, yeah, that's really why you're doing this, isn't it? All this idea that the kind of the mean and the nasty and the selfish and the base is somehow more real and more authentic than the good and the kind. And the question is why? On what basis does it feel more honest to identify with the negative than it is to identify with the positive? In fact, these are simply conditioned phenomena that are arising and passing away in the mind. And if in the course of performing an act of kindness you have maybe hundreds or even thousands of positive, kind thoughts, why is it that just a few seconds of negativity are seen to outweigh the positive? It's a strange kind of habit to think in that way, but it's unfortunately common. So through observation, we can say that any thought can arise in the mind, and no thought is like really who you are. So the practice of mindfulness is one in which we begin to observe, we begin to recognize or recognize things that we've taken personally and saying, yeah, these are just part of the flow. I remember when I was Pakao, when I was an Anagarika, so this is a very long time ago now, and that Lumpur Sumeto told us that someone had phoned him up, and a woman is very distraught because she had a child, and I think she was depressed, and then she had these thoughts of killing her child. And if she was so distressed by this that she phoned Lumpur and she's like, "Am I a monster?" Or it's just awful. How could a mother possibly think such a thing? And as I remember, Lumpur said, "Well, did you actually kill your child?" And she says, "No, of course not. How you think I would even?" Well, exactly. It's just a thought, and that phrase is such a common, almost a cliche, isn't it, amongst Buddhist men? It's just a thought, but it's an incredibly profound insight. It's nothing more. It's nothing. It's a thought. It's something that arises in that thought realm. And there are we can distinguish two kinds of thought. There's a thought that just pops up in your mind, and that's the result of previous karma. So it's not good or bad, it's result. But where the present karma arises is how you relate to that, how you respond to that, or without mindfulness, how you react to that. So you can't take responsibility for the things that pop up in your mind, whether they are good or bad. But what you can take responsibility for is whether or not you indulge in them, whether you harbor them, whether you follow them, whether you express them physically or verbally. And again, we observe that our ability to act well, act ethically, act wisely is conditioned by the amount of mindfulness we have. So with mindfulness, it's almost as if mental phenomena, subjectively at least, mental phenomena was almost slow motion, or certainly it's slightly, there's a kind of a space around the phenomena that arise in the mind. There's a space within which we can respond in a way which is in harmony with our aspirations and ideals, rather than this blind reaction. So one beautiful saying of the Vietnamese master Thich Nhat Hanh, in the mind without mindfulness, there are few options or few choices. And with mindfulness, we have many choices. So the more mindful you are, the more choices you have. And the more mindful you are, then the more you can, more easily, you can keep the precept. So on the precepts, we're observing what kinds of action, what kinds of speech lead to a happy and harmonious community, happy, harmonious family, and what kinds of actions and what kinds of speech undermine that sense of warmth and trust and community. And this is the grounding of ethics, not some commandments in a holy book, but it springs from our own observation. Yeah, when I act in this way, these are the results. When the people around me act, when we speak in these ways, it feels like this. We speak in this constantly observing. And the Buddhist teachings are, Ehipasika teachings, they are encouraging us to put them to the test. And this is how faith grows. In many religions and philosophies, faith is like a dead end, really. You have a choice. You can believe or you can't believe. You don't believe. It's a binary kind of choice. But in Buddhism, the focus of faith is the human capacity, the human potential for liberation. So the Buddha said to his disciples, I'm teaching you to abandon the unwholesome because it's something you can do. If you couldn't do it, I wouldn't teach it. I'm teaching you to develop the wholesome because you can do it. If you couldn't, I wouldn't teach it. So if our faith is that in the enlightenment of the Buddha, then we are our essential faith, and how our faith plays out or manifests in our daily life is we have the faith in the human capacity, and therefore our own capacity to abandon the unwholesome, to develop the wholesome, to purify the mind. So we are, morally bound to to try it out. Well, if you believe that you can abandon the unwholesome, then you have to give it a try. And when you find that you can make some progress, you do see some reduction of the unwholesome in the mind, then the confidence in the Buddhist teaching increases. So we're putting each of the Buddhist teachings to the test of experience, and the more we put them to the test, the more they stand up to close scrutiny. And if you've been practicing for a long time, then it's like, yeah, that's really true. That's really true. Oh, that's so true. Yeah, that's right. That's again and again and again and again. And this is how faith becomes so firm and so strong. Not through an act of faith, it's yes, but it's through many, many, many small yeses. And those are yeses based upon observation. Yeah, the Buddha says this is an obstacle. Yeah, and I see that. Yeah, it really is an obstacle. The Buddha says if you do this, then that will have, yeah, it does. That's really true. So this is how this reasoned faith, not a blind or a superstitious faith, it's a faith based upon the effort to put the teachings to the test of our own experience and to be observing those around us, observing people in the society generally, constantly observing, and putting the effort into purifying our powers of observation, and particularly our mindfulness, and developing that faculty of mindfulness. So we begin to see things that seem very kind of solid and substantial start to crumble. And the sense of self, it's not that we have to get rid of it, it's just we have to observe it. We have to observe how it arises and passes away. So many philosophies and religions have answers to when did the world begin? How long ago was it? Was it 5,000 years, or was it so many thousands and millions of years? Or and Buddhism, we say, hey, it begins right now. The moment that there is an identification with the body, with feelings, with perceptions, with emotions, with thoughts, with sense consciousness, the world arises. The world arises and it passes away. We're born as an angry person, and then we die away from being an angry person, and we're born as a forgiving person. So we're being born and dying many times in a day. So that's not to say that's the real meaning of rebirth, but that's one of the dimensions of rebirth, and the dimensions of rebirth that we can investigate and observe in our daily life. And then we meditate, and what happens the moment that we are together with our breath, this mindfulness established on the breath, then that sense of personal identity wavers and even disappears. The sense of being this person, that person, with this particular personal history, with these personality traits, which these things I like about myself, these things I don't like, it's just gone, isn't it? It's not there anymore. There's just the breath, in-breath, out-breath, feelings arising, passing away, perceptions arising, passing away, thoughts arising, passing away. And this is what we call the real world. This is the real world. So why go to a monastery? We just want to go experience the real world. Because what else is there? There's right now, what's going on. And the more you are committed to this practice of observation, so many things start to fall away and reconstitute. You see, this idea of being a person, of being this is not like a fixed thing. It's not the locus of our life. It's something that's an unstable phenomena that can be observed. There's all sorts of what's happiness. So we're fed so much propaganda, I guess, aren't we, about what actually makes us happy, and what's the relationship between happiness and consumption, and happiness and sense experience. And then when we put away all those preconceptions and those ideas that we're being fed by our culture and the society we live in, we begin to observe, acts of goodness, kindness. They just make us happy. Any kind of activity conducted with mindfulness and attention feels good. So we're getting this kind of data all the time, and it's making it conscious and recognizing how it goes against the stream of what we're generally led to believe. Desires as well. We think, I have this kind of desire, I have this kind of need. But if we're looking at it more closely, we see fluctuations of intensity, for instance. And this, in fact, this kind of observation is made use of in behavioral science, for instance. I was reading recently an account of behavioral scientists' technique for helping people to overcome addiction, say to cigarettes, for instance. So he said what he would do is to encourage his patient or his client to observe every time he had a desire for a cigarette, to grade the intensity of desire from 1 to 5, keep a diary for a couple of weeks. And then afterwards they review, and then he's given the challenge of abstaining from smoking every time that the intensity is a 1 or a 2. So now he's observed that it's not just this thing called craving to smoke, but there's this impermanent, fluctuating desire. Sometimes it's strong, sometimes it's weak, and just being able to make that simple observation. It's not a thing. And then starting off with the easy, starting off with 1s and 2s, and then working upwards. So a lot of these desires that we have, and then we just say, I have this kind of problem, or I get so angry when this happens. This makes me so depressed. We say, well, observe. Does it give you do you get depressed every single time there's that trigger? Or are there some occasions where you don't feel depressed at all? Or are there some times when the emotion is strong, other times when it's weak,
what are the conditioning factors? So this is the Buddhist analysis, isn't it? The resolving things into conditioned processes. So it can sound rather kind of cold and kind of uninspiring, but there's a real enjoyment to it actually, and it doesn't sound so uplifting as talking about emptiness and all these things, but get down to the nitty-gritty. Why is it that you say, well, when somebody says this to me, it just brings up so much. Well, does it always, in every single case? And is it independent of who says it? Or is the intensity of the reaction conditioned to some extent by who it is? If someone you love says it, someone you feel indifferent towards, someone that you dislike, is it exactly the same? Well, why is it? What's the difference there? This is how we observe. What's the relationship to our physical health? Or it's quite straightforward, isn't it? That when we're stressed out or we're feeling very tired, weary, that it's much easier to lose our temper or to become irritated than when we're feeling on top of the world. This is practice in daily life, observing this, and observing that there's no owner there. These are conditioned phenomena. There's just this flow, constant flow, and observing this flow. They're saying now when we do a good action, okay, let's say an act of kindness, generosity, then sometimes we can perform an act of generosity with some ulterior motive. We want something in return. And other times we can act with just pure altruism, desire to reduce someone's suffering or to make them happy. So then we observe that after some time, when we look back on that, we recollect that action. There's a difference there. When you recollect a kind action that was performed with an ulterior motive, you're left cold by it. The memory is emotionally somewhat akin to that of a transaction. But when you recall that you performed an action with no wish for any kind of recognition at all, out of a genuine desire that person should be free of their suffering or they should be happy, you recollect it and joy arises in the mind. That's an important observation, isn't it? And often when we act well, and I'm sure we act well on many occasions, and we act kindly and with altruism on many occasions. But what needs to be observed is that we gain what we call a noble treasure of the heart. And that's a resource within us that we can draw upon. So of the different meditation techniques, what we call the anusati, the recollection meditations, are often overlooked. They're not given the importance that they deserve. If your mind is very agitated, or there's a lot going on, or just incredible kind of resistance to your primary meditation object, such as the breath, for instance, then put the breath down and just recollect genuine acts of kindness that you performed in your life. You can, first time you do it, you can write them down and just have a list. But through recollecting your goodness, then a sense of well-being and even joy and bliss can arise in the mind. And that joy, that bliss, can wash away, can dissolve the hindrances in the mind and lead you to samadhi in a way that your primary meditation object might not be able to help you with at that time. So goodness is this. It's just a quite amazing, remarkable thing. This is what merit is. Merit is goodness. It's the happiness, the potential within the mind that is created. It's the noble treasure of the mind, which is created when you act well and you act kindly. I think it's such a shame that people feel rather wary about appreciating their own goodness. They think, I just get kind of stuck up and conceited, and sort of it's a spiritual danger or trap. But with right view and right understanding and observation, then there's no reason that should occur. So I have a simile. The simile is the master gardener gives you some seeds, flower seeds, and you plant those seeds in your back garden. And you follow all the instructions faithfully. You plant it in the right amount of sun or shade. You water it. You protect it from bugs and so on. And eventually you get these beautiful flowers in bloom, and people come around and say, "Oh, what beautiful flowers!" So how would you feel? You wouldn't feel kind of puffed up and conceited, would you? You'd feel good, but you feel, this really good, beautiful flowers. I'm so fortunate to have these seeds, and I followed all the instructions, and they just grew up like that. So you don't feel it's like a personal accomplishment. And it's the same with the virtues that arise in the mind through the practice of Buddha's teachings. If you're observant and you have right view, you think, I'm really special. I'm like this, I'm like that. You think, it's just so, I followed the Buddha's teachings. I did what the Buddha told me. And look at the beautiful results. That's so wonderful. And in fact, you see your faith in the Buddha Dhamma increases because you can see, when you faithfully follow the instructions, this is what happens. So this is something I really encourage you to do. When you get depressed and down and discouraged and feel insecure, and that you have the resources to deal with these negative mental states within you. You have these noble treasures, which are the memory of the good things that you've done in your life, and learn how to recollect them and bring them up and enjoy them. Enjoy them not as your personal attributes, but this is the Dhamma, this is the Buddha's Dhamma, which has manifested in your life through following the teachings or through simply responding to that impulse to goodness and compassion within you. So all good things are coming from this effort to put the teachings to the test, looking, observing what makes you happy, what makes you unhappy. So we have the answers from the Buddha. It's like a cheat sheet. The Buddha says, if you're suffering, there's craving in your mind. What's craving? Well, craving is the desire that comes from ignorance. So the Buddha didn't say we shouldn't have any desire in the mind. That's impossible. But he said there are two kinds of desire. Desire that springs from is the natural expression of accompaniment of ignorance, is called craving and is the cause of suffering. And the desire and the will that comes from understanding of the way things are, vicca rather than avicca, is a wholesome kind of desire, which is in Pali is given the name of Dhammachanta or Kusala Chanta or simply Chanta. So we're seeking to channel this energy away from the tanha, the craving, path into the way of chanda. So if you see someone suffering and you want to help them, that's not a defilement, is it? This is the wholesome Dhamma. It's part of the path rather than part of the or the cause of suffering. The person observing, is that right? Is that a legitimate? Is that a good way, or is that a correct way of looking at motivation, of making that distinction? The Buddha is saying, challenging you, have a look, see for yourself. How does it feel? Is there not a difference between the feeling of wanting to get something and wanting to become something and the feeling of wanting to help somebody? So what is the distinction? What are the causes and conditions there? So the Buddha is saying that if there is suffering in the mind, then you can know immediately there must be some kind of craving in the mind, because without that craving, there would be no suffering. So here we make a distinction between causes and conditions. So sometimes people say, yeah, Buddha says everything's in your heart. Just look after your heart and everything will be okay. But he didn't say that. He said there are causes and conditions. And the things around us are the conditions. And we only have very limited power to manipulate, to control, to deal with, to control those things. But if all the conditions for suffering are present, but there's no craving in the mind, no suffering can result. You can have a very sort of difficult time physically, but there's no mental suffering, because the mental suffering only occurs in the presence of the craving. So then we can observe very simply, you can be in a wonderful place, like a heaven realm, Chithurst, where everywhere you look is beautiful. But if you're in a bad mood, then all that beauty is meaningless. You can be in a really ugly, desolate kind of environment. If your heart's full of love and compassion or mindfulness, then that external ugliness loses its power over you. So this is just very simple, mundane observation, isn't it? That in the various elements that go to, that constitute your basic sense of well-being, the vital factor, the essential factor, is the internal factor, not the external factor. But the Buddha didn't just teach the Dhamma, he taught the Dhamma Vinaya. He said that these triggers, they are things that encourage you. They can encourage you to be selfish, encouraging you to be greedy, encourage you to be anxious, encouraging. So it just makes sense to reduce those kinds of triggers as much as is possible, and to promote those triggers, things that encourage us to be kind and good and honest and so on. But that's the Vinaya side of practice. But the Dhamma side is not allowing that vital element of craving to rise in the mind. So some people say, oh, he made me so sad, or she's sort of, oh, what she did has just made me so angry. But this is a very unwise use of language, isn't it? It's just giving far too much power to external phenomena. You're assuming external phenomena are causes rather than conditions. And so if somebody says somebody made you so angry, no, nobody can make you angry. Nobody can make you sad. Nothing that can happen can make you depressed. Those are things that are conditions conducive to depression, conducive to anger, conducive to jealousy, conducive to fury, but they're not causes. So when somebody said something, how would that not make you angry? No, we can say it's a strong invitation to anger. But only if you say, I don't want him to do that. I don't want him to be like that. She shouldn't say that. She shouldn't be that way. There always has to be that particular kind of craving in the mind, wanting it to be a certain way or not wanting it to be a certain way. And that's the factor that we do have the capacity to let go of. So external world, no, I mean, to a certain extent. And we should try, say, with keeping precepts and through the laws of the land and conventions and customs to create environments which are encouraging what is noble within us rather than what is ignoble. But we can there's only a limited success with that. But what we can work with is this craving. Craving based on ignorance. And so how do we overcome ignorance? By looking closely at body and mind, observing. And this is how we investigate the Four Noble Truths. So I realize I've been talking for rather a long time, so so seldom that I come to visit you all, so I hope you'll forgive me for talking for so long, and offer you these thoughts for your reflection.